Each year, a representative group of graduates of the college, on behalf of all of the graduates, are asked to nominate a member of the faculty to speak on this occasion. This year's faculty speaker is Dinah Iglesias, Associate Professor of Sociology. Professor Iglesias.
Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues, families and friends, and graduates. I'm delighted to have been invited to give the faculty address at this year's Columbian College graduation celebration. I'm going to begin by saying a few words about myself so that you understand how I came to choose the format of my brief address to you. This fall, my older child, Nick, will leave our family's little nest and set off for college. As he readies himself to go, I feel a complex combination of pride, sadness, worry, and excitement. Many of the parents here today surely remember having these feelings 4 years ago when your children set off for college. There's so much I want to say to him, but I'm afraid I won't be able to convey it fully in a conversation. So I'm thinking that before he goes, I'd like to write him a letter to share my feelings, because you know how teenage boys love that. And to offer a few words of advice, because you know how teenagers love advice. So it occurred to me as I was thinking about this plan that this occasion at which we find ourselves today is analogous in some respects. You, our graduates, are leaving the big, sometimes comforting, sometimes crazy nest of your undergraduate years and institution. The life that you have made in this place for this time is over. And it's just about time to fly away again. So I decided to write you a letter too. My letter has 3 parts. The first is a few sentimental words. The second is a short lesson, I promise it'll be short, from my discipline of sociology. And the third is a small piece of advice to take along with you as you go. So, dear Columbian College graduating class of 2013, while I unfortunately have not had the opportunity to meet all of you, I've had the pleasure of meeting quite a lot of you, even outside of my discipline of sociology. At the end of the term, students will often say thanks and offer a few kind words about a class, which I appreciate. But I want to say thank you to you as well. It's not often that professors get to convey this, but I want you to know that I learned from the ideas that you offer and the questions that you ask. And it changes how I think and influences how I teach. Education is not a one-way process. And I speak for so many of my colleagues when I say thank you for what you've taught us too. It's been a pleasure to teach you and to learn from you. Now the lesson. The discipline of sociology highlights the idea that knowledge is a form of power. But that does not encompass only mastering knowledge of what others have researched or written. It includes, importantly, the creation of knowledge. I tell my classes, for example, about a classic writing of Victorian-era medicine, penned by a male Harvard doctor, which described what he termed the brain-womb conflict in young women. He hypothesized that blood traveling upwards to the brain for the purpose of intellectual pursuits would lead to a defeminization of women, the starvation of the reproductive organs, and a consequent crisis of human reproduction. In short, he posited that the female pursuit of knowledge would lead to a shrinking of the uterus. Well, think about the effects of these ostensible facts, which were seen as credible at the time, on women's lives and opportunities. Today this seems funny, but the larger point remains true. Control of the creation of knowledge and ideas is a critical form of power. It was when women's production of knowledge about themselves began to enter mainstream thinking that these so-called facts began to change. Social groups benefit when they seize the opportunity to create knowledge about themselves rather than being defined by others. I bring this up in part because of an article I happened to read this week in Time magazine. While not entirely negative in its conclusions, the article engaged in the creation of knowledge about millennials. That's the generation that includes most of you. The cover reads, quote, "Millennials are lazy, entitled narcissists who still live with their parents." No, don't applaud that. No, listen, guys, I'll interrupt the letter. That's not the applause line. Be patient. It quotes from a book written by an English professor called The Dumbest Generation. No applause. A description of the book from Booklist notes that, quote, "The younger generation today is less informed, less literate, and more self-absorbed than any that has preceded it." I feel like you're undermining my point. A New York Times review of this book adds that, quote, "Never have American students had it so easy, and never have they achieved less." Shh. None of the authors of these writings is a millennial. So, here's a question. What are you going to do to define yourselves? Can you seize the power to define your generation and to create knowledge about yourselves that challenges the dominant story written to this point predominantly by others? Your education has not been only about learning what others have researched and written. It has also given you the tools to create knowledge and to think and act to write your own story. All right. Finally, dear graduates, I'll wrap up my letter with one piece of advice. Know what you know. More about that in a moment. The liberal arts have been the subject of some negative press recently. Cuts within university systems have hit the liberal arts disciplines particularly brutally. And one hears calls for higher education to take a more vocational path and to cast aside traditional liberal arts education. But data don't support this call. I recently read a study, for example, of 318 middle to large size employers commissioned by the American Association of Colleges and Universities. The news here is not grim. Fully 3/4 of employers indicate that they want colleges to prepare students for work by emphasizing skills in critical thinking, complex problem solving, oral and written communication, and applied knowledge of the kind you get in internships, community service, and the like. You know this. This is what you've been learning and doing here. But it's not enough to have these skills. You have to master the skill of clearly naming them, describing them, and linking them to the jobs to which you aspire. That is my advice to you. If you cannot readily name your top 5 skills, then you've still got one last homework assignment to complete. Know your skills, name your skills, and use them to get a job, to do some good, and to write your own story. As you leave our nest, I wish you a safe and pleasant flight. Enjoy the journey.